The morning my grandfather was laid to rest in Huntsville, my brother arrived at the Muskoka Cottage before the last car had left the cemetery. I had driven up from Toronto the previous night. 4 hours on the 400 with the radio off and the kind of silence you keep when you don't want to say us out loud that someone is truly gone. My grandfather, Harold Mercer, had built his life from a single rented warehouse in Barrie, Ontario, and turned it into a mid-sized industrial supply company that still had his name on the side of a building he could no longer walk into because the second heart attack had slowed him considerably. He had maintained the Muskoka property for 40 years, without ever once talking about what it might be worth on the open market. He used to say the lake didn't care about square footage, and neither did he. He died on a Tuesday in late September. His doctor had been cautioning us for 14 months. Still, when the call came at 6 in the morning, I sat down on my kitchen floor and did not move for a very long time. If you have ever lost the one person in your family who actually saw you for who you were, the one who never asked you to be smaller or quieter or more convenient, you already understand what that floor feels like. The funeral was on a Friday. By 3 in the afternoon, I was back at the cottage with the kettle on and the kind of quiet that feels too big for one person. I was still wearing my funeral dress when I heard my brother's truck on the gravel lane. He let himself in without knocking. His wife came in right behind him, already moving through the living room the way people move when they're inventorying rather than visiting. Her fingers trailed along the edge of the windowsill. Her gaze moved over the lake view with a calculation she hadn't bothered to conceal. My brother dropped a leather portfolio on my grandfather's dining room table, the one with the water ring from 30 summers of lemonade pitchers, and looked at me with the expression I had known since childhood. The look he wore when he believed he was the smartest person in the room and wanted you to feel it. "The will goes to probate Monday morning," he said. "Before that happens, we need to talk." He opened the portfolio and slid a consent form across the table. Highlighted signature line at the bottom, multiple tabs, professionally printed. "There are complications in the estate structure," he said. "The CRA could flag the company accounts during probate if there's no active trustee managing things. I'm asking you to consent to me acting as temporary estate trustee. It protects the employees. It protects the family." My sister-in-law turned from the window. She used her professional voice, the warm, calibrated, nothing to concern yourself, with voice she had spent years perfecting. "Standard practice in situations like this," she said. "We're trying to prevent complications before they start." I looked at the form. I am a chartered professional accountant and a chartered business valuator. I had spent 9 years doing forensic work at a firm in downtown Toronto, 9 years of dismantling fraudulent financial structures and presenting the wreckage to courts in plain language. I had reviewed enough manufactured legal paperwork to recognize the architecture of a trap even when it had been dressed in reassuring language and tabbed with colored stickers. "I'll have my own counsel look at it," I said. My brother's expression shifted, not to anger, not yet, to the specific, controlled impatience of a man who has rehearsed a conversation and finds the other participant going off script. "There's no time for that," he said. "The cottage has been filed in an interim administrative claim as a corporate asset. If you're still residing here without signing by Monday morning, you're technically in breach. I can have a process server and a property manager here by noon." My sister-in-law leaned forward, and now the warmth in her voice had gone elsewhere. "You've worked at the same accounting firm for 9 years, Corinna. You rent a 1-bedroom in Leslieville. We all know Grandpa loved you, but he was an old man who ran a simple operation. He didn't understand the complexity of what he was leaving behind. Your brother does. That's what CFOs are for." She straightened the already straight edge of her blazer. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." My brother crossed his arms. "You've spent your whole career counting other people's money, and you still can't afford a down payment. Grandpa gave you the sentimental stuff because he felt sorry for you. The business, the actual asset, that belongs with someone who understands how to manage it." My mother stepped forward from where she'd been sitting near the fireplace. She had cried at the graveside, genuinely I thought, but the grief had resolved by the time they'd pulled into the lane. She placed her hand over mine on the table. It felt cold and deliberate. "Be sensible," she said softly. "Your brother is trying to protect the family. Don't be difficult today of all days." I looked at her hand. I thought about what my grandfather had said to me 2 Christmases ago when he'd pressed a slip of paper into my palm, just a phone number, no name attached, and told me to keep it somewhere I wouldn't forget. He hadn't explained why. He had just looked at me the way he sometimes did, with a steadiness that felt like a hand on a shoulder, and said, "You'll know when you need it." "I'm going to call Mr. Carver tonight," I said. Something moved behind my sister-in-law's eyes, not alarm yet, something closer to recalculation. "Harold's estate lawyer is a general practitioner in a small town," she said carefully. "He doesn't have capacity for corporate estate matters at this level." "I'll manage," I said. My brother collected the portfolio. On his way to the front door, he stopped at the fireplace mantel and picked up the photograph from the summer I was 12. My grandfather and me in matching orange life jackets, holding up a pickerel that was barely worth keeping. We were both laughing so hard you could see it even in a still image. My brother looked at the photograph for a moment, then he set it back face down on the mantel, like something he'd decided was no longer relevant. "Sign the papers by Sunday evening," he said. "Monday will be unpleasant if you don't." I stood at the kitchen window and watched the truck reverse down the lane. Then I called Mr. Carver. He answered on the second ring. He said he had been expecting to hear from me. He said my grandfather had told him several months earlier that when the time came it would be me who called. "He left something for you," Mr. Carver said. "Not through the will, separately in the boathouse." Under the third board from the left on the back deck of the boathouse, the spare key to the mechanical room. I had watched my grandfather hide it there when I was 9 years old, standing in the shadow of the dock where he couldn't see me. He had never known I was watching. I had never told him I knew. I went out to the boathouse after dark with my phone's flashlight and a jacket that wasn't warm enough for October on the water. The mechanical room smelled of engine oil and cold concrete. Behind the water pump was a fireproof document box with a combination lock. My grandmother's birthday. The same combination he'd used for the garage keypad and the luggage lock and the alarm system he'd finally installed 3 years ago, when my sister-in-law had convinced him Muskoka wasn't as safe as it used to be. My grandmother had been gone 11 years. He had not changed a single combination she had ever set. Inside the box, a sealed envelope with my name on it in his handwriting, and a thick sheaf of documents held together with a binder clip and a yellow sticky note that said simply, "Start here." I sat down on the concrete floor and I read. My grandfather had noticed the irregularities 14 months earlier. He wasn't a forensic accountant, but he had built a company from a single rented warehouse, and he knew his own books the way a person knows the weight of a tool they've carried for 40 years. You feel it the moment something changes, even before you can name what's different. Supplier payments that didn't match purchase orders. An operating expense line that grew in ways the business volume didn't justify. A numbered company appearing in the payables ledger that he didn't recognize. And when he asked my brother about it, my brother had explained it away with a fluency that should have been reassuring and somehow wasn't. He had hired a private forensic accounting firm out of Sudbury, quietly, without telling anyone, without alerting the board, without alerting my brother who was the CFO. What they found took 4 months to document fully. My brother, using his CFO credentials and corporate signing authority, had established 2 shell corporations through a law firm registered in the Cayman Islands. Over 28 months, he had directed $3,900,000 in company funds through fabricated supplier invoices into those shells, and from there into a set of personal investment accounts. My sister-in-law had drafted the contracts that made the paperwork look legitimate at a surface review. She had the paralegal credentials to produce documents that would pass anything short of a forensic examination. The Canada Revenue Agency's Criminal Investigations Division had opened their own parallel inquiry 11 months ago. My grandfather's estate lawyer had been coordinating with them since the summer, turning over everything the private auditors had found. They had been building toward a clean triggering event, a concrete, prosecutable act of fraud before moving. The last page in the folder was a handwritten note on his personal stationery. Corinna. I've written this 4 times and thrown it out each time because I kept looking for the right words, and eventually I decided the right words were simply the true ones. You were always the one I trusted with the things that mattered. Not because you were more talented than your brother, though you are, but because you were the only one who never once asked me for anything. The cottage is in an alter ego trust in your name. It has been for 18 months. Your brother doesn't know. Mr. Carver has all the documentation. The number at the bottom of this page is for Sergeant Croft at the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit. He is a thorough and patient man, and he has been waiting a long time for your brother to make his final move. I'm sorry to leave you with this work. I am not sorry that it's you doing it. Take care of the lake. I read it twice. Then I sat on the concrete floor of the mechanical room, with the sound of the water moving against the dock outside, and the cold coming up through the foundation, and I let myself feel what there was to feel, which was grief and fury in proportions I hadn't anticipated, and underneath both of them, something else entirely, something steady. I photographed every page of the audit documents with my phone and sent the files to my firm's secure server. Then I walked back up to the cottage. At 11:30, I dialed the number at the bottom of my grandfather's note. Sergeant Croft answered on the first ring. He told me the CRA had been positioned to act for some time. He explained that what they had needed was a concrete triggering event, an active, provable attempt to commit fraud using the estate, before they could move cleanly and without a procedural challenge. My brother filing a fabricated corporate claim against property held in a personal trust, and then sending a process server to enforce that claim would give them exactly what they needed to close the case. He asked when my brother planned to return. Morning, I told him. My brother had mentioned a noon deadline and a process server before he'd left. We'll be in position by 7, Sergeant Croft said. I didn't sleep. I made more tea and sat at my grandfather's dining room table and watched the sky over the lake change from black to gray to the particular pale gold that October produces in Muskoka when the season is turning properly. I thought about 40 years of Sunday mornings at that table. I thought about the photograph still lying face down on the mantel. I got up and turned it right side up. I called my younger sister, Elodie, in Ottawa and told her what I had found and what was happening in the morning. She listened without interrupting. Her husband, Matthias, picked up the extension partway through, and when I finished, he said he was driving up overnight and would be there before dawn because he didn't think I should be alone on the property. I told him he didn't have to do that. He said he knew. He arrived at 5:45. We sat together at my grandfather's table and drank coffee and watched the lake come into focus as the light grew. We didn't talk much, we didn't need to. At 8:45, I heard tires on the gravel. I was wearing the charcoal blazer I wore to Bay Street client presentations. My grandfather's ceramic mug, the old one from the Huntsville gas station, Muskoka in letters that had mostly washed off, was in my right hand. Matthias had positioned himself in the boathouse at my request, out of sight, with his phone recording. My brother's truck came up the lane first, then an unfamiliar sedan, the process server, a heavy-set man in a nylon jacket who climbed out with a manila envelope and the carefully maintained neutrality of someone paid to deliver bad news without absorbing it. My mother stepped out last from the back seat of my brother's truck, in her good coat with her handbag held in both hands. She looked at the cottage with the expression of someone who has already decided where the furniture should go. My brother came to the front door and knocked. It was a different knock from the one he might have given a stranger. Clipped, official, the knock of someone who wants a record of having asked before going in regardless. I opened the door. You didn't sign, he said. No, I agreed. He straightened. The process server was already moving up the front path. Then you're being served. Receivership order, effective immediately. You have 4 hours to remove your personal belongings. After that, the property manager I've engaged will be here to change the locks and secure the asset. The process server reached the bottom step and began the formal recitation. He got through my name and the property address before the sound of vehicles coming up the gravel lane made him stop mid-sentence. 3 vehicles came through the open gate, 2 unmarked dark SUVs and a marked RCMP cruiser, white with the gold stripe, moving quietly with no lights and no sirens, which in my experience is always more purposeful and more serious than lights would have been. They parked across the mouth of the lane with a precision that closed off the exit in a way that was entirely clear if you were paying the right kind of attention. Sergeant Croft walked up the front path in a dark jacket with his identification badge visible on his belt. He moved with the calm, unhurried economy of a man who has conducted this exact type of morning a considerable number of times and has stopped finding it remarkable. He said my brother's full name. My brother's face went through a rapid internal sequence before settling on something that tried to look like confusion and landed several meters short of it. What is this? RCMP Financial Crimes Unit, coordinating with the Canada Revenue Agency Criminal Investigations Division. Sergeant Croft produced warrants from inside his jacket. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of fraud over $5,000, money laundering, and breach of fiduciary duty in connection with Mercer Industrial Supply Limited. He glanced past my brother toward the driveway. And a warrant for your wife on charges relating to the preparation and execution of fraudulent commercial contracts. My sister-in-law made a sound I had never heard from her before, short and involuntary, immediately compressed. I want to speak to a lawyer, my brother said. His voice had gone flat and very careful, the way voices go when the person speaking is buying time and knows it. You'll have that opportunity, Sergeant Croft said. He looked at my brother with the patient, slightly tired expression of a man who has stopped being surprised by anything. Before that, I'd like you to understand that the property you've just served a receivership notice on has been held in a registered alter ego trust in your sister's name for the past 18 months. It is not a corporate asset. It has never been registered as one. The interim claim your counsel filed was based on falsified documentation. That additional fraud on top of the existing charges changes your position considerably. My brother looked at me. Not through me, not past me, but actually at me, for perhaps the first time that entire weekend. I raised my grandfather's coffee mug and took a slow, deliberate sip. The RCMP officers moved forward. My brother and his wife were placed under arrest with the kind of quiet efficiencies that leaves no room for theatrical resistance. My sister-in-law stared at the lake the entire time, as if she were trying to commit the view to memory. The process server had backed up to his sedan during the arrest and stood there with his envelope still in both hands, visibly uncertain what protocol applied to a man who has just served papers at the precise location of a simultaneous federal arrest. Sergeant Croft glanced at him. "You're free to go," Sergeant Croft said. He went. My mother had not moved from the spot beside my brother's truck. She watched the RCMP vehicles until they had turned out of the lane and disappeared through the trees. Then she walked toward me with the expression I had known my whole life. The one she wore when a situation had failed to go the way she had guaranteed herself it would, and she hadn't yet settled on a revised approach. She said she had had no idea. She said she had come along that morning purely out of concern for me. The grief, being alone up here, all of it. She said whatever mistakes my brother had made, she was still my mother, and she hoped I could hold on to that. I looked at her across the front path. "You got in the truck," I said. "You drove 4 hours from Barrie with a process server and a receivership notice to remove me from my grandfather's property. On the second day after his funeral." I paused. "That isn't what concern looks like." She reached for the railing at the bottom step. "Corinna." "Mr. Carver will be here Monday morning," I said. "You're welcome to attend as a family member. Beyond that, this is my property and I'm asking you to leave it." I went inside and closed the door. The probate process took 4 months. There were procedural maneuvers. A petition filed claiming my grandfather had lacked mental capacity when he established the trust, which Mr. Carver had anticipated in advance, and which my grandfather's own cardiologist dismantled with a dated cognitive assessment signed 2 weeks after the first cardiac event. The petition was dismissed. My brother accepted a plea arrangement the following autumn. 4-year federal sentence, full restitution order. My sister-in-law received a separate sentence and a permanent prohibition from practicing in any legal capacity in Ontario. The CRA civil recovery proceedings ran concurrently and were thorough. Mercer Industrial Supply went through court-supervised restructuring. All 43 employees kept their positions. I completed the forensic audit of the remaining accounts at cost because it seemed like the thing my grandfather would have wanted. My mother lost the Barrie house. Not through anything I arranged, but because she had co-signed one of my brother's personal loans 2 years prior, using the house as collateral without fully comprehending the terms. She moved into a subsidized rental in Orillia and called me in the first weeks. The voicemails had a consistent shape to them: sympathy first, then circumstances, then a question about what I might be in a position to do. I listened to the first 3 and did not call back. 7 months after the restructuring was complete, she drove up to the cottage unannounced on a weekday morning in May. I was working at the kitchen table when my phone showed the gate camera. She was standing at the end of the lane in a coat I didn't recognize, looking smaller than I remembered. I went out to the front porch. She said she had nowhere else to go. She said she had been thinking for months about what she wanted to say to me, and now that she was here, she couldn't remember any of it. She said she was tired. She said she missed her father and she missed having somewhere to go when things were bad, and this had always been that place. I looked at her for a long moment. This was always that place for me too, I said. You helped take it. She didn't argue. That surprised me more than anything else had. I told her I would send her Mr. Carver's contact information. He had directed me to a seniors housing support service in Aurelia that might be able to help her stabilize her situation. Beyond that, I didn't have anything to offer her, not because I was unable, but because I had thought carefully about what rebuilding a relationship would require, and she had not yet shown me the part of herself capable of beginning that work. I watched her walk back down the lane. Then I went inside and stood at my grandfather's dining room table, for a moment, my hand on the wood on the water ring. That October, Elodie and Matthias drove up for the weekend to see the renovations. Matthias had done most of the work over the summer. New dock boards, the boathouse fully restored, the kitchen updated for the first time in 20 years. We had argued cheerfully for 2 months about what he should charge. We had eventually landed somewhere in the middle, which was the right place. The cottage had its first guests in May, a writer from Kingston who needed 3 weeks of quiet, a couple from Mississauga celebrating 25 years who had been trying to get up to Muskoka for a decade and kept finding reasons not to manage it. They left a note on the kitchen table when they checked out. They said it was the most rested they had felt in years. They said they would be back. We sat on the back deck that October evening, the three of us, with a bottle of wine Matthias had brought, and the particular stillness that only arrives when something has finally finished resolving. The lake was going silver in the last light. The maples were at full color, the birches already turning towards bare. They did what they did every year, entirely indifferent to everything that happened beneath them. My sister put her head on her husband's shoulder. "Grandpa would have liked this," she said. I thought she was right. The water ring was still on the dining room table. I had thought about sanding it out during the renovation, when everything else was being refreshed, and then I had decided to leave it alone. Some marks are proof that a table has been used for something worth remembering. If there is one thing the past year gave me, and I mean this plainly, not as something to stitch on a cushion, it is this. The people who mistake your patience for passivity will, eventually, make the mistake that finishes them. You don't have to announce what you know. You don't have to be loud. You have to be prepared, and precise, and willing to let the evidence do what evidence does when it finally has room to work. My grandfather spent 14 months building that case, document by document, in the mechanical room of the boathouse, while continuing to have Sunday dinners with the people who were stealing from him. He said nothing. He changed nothing in his behavior. He just made sure that when the moment came, whoever was left holding his name would also be holding everything they needed. That is not weakness, that is the most specific kind of strength. I still carry his note in the inside pocket of my blazer. I have since the morning I found it on the concrete floor, with the water moving outside and the cold coming up through the foundation, and the lake out there beyond the door, the same as it had always been. If your own family has ever looked at you and seen only what they could take, I'd like to hear about it. Tell me in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. And if this story found you when you needed it, pass it on to someone else who does.